This is Join Us in France, episode 42. Hello, I'm Annie.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I am sure.
And I'm Elise.
And we welcome you to the Join Us in France travel podcast. Elise is a professional tour guide, art historian, and a really good storyteller. Mm-hmm. On today's show, we go to a place that either gets heralded as like genius or like, oh, that's a monstrosity. And I'm talking about the Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris, which Parisians call Beaubourg.
Beaubourg.
And you'll have to explain why that is.
I will.
So we'll have a little music and then we'll come back and talk about Beaubourg. All right, we're back. So how are you, Elise?
I'm better.
You're better. Yeah, you had a cold last week.
Yeah, my voice is still a little bit rusty, I guess you can say. I think I just have to stop talking so much all the time. That might help. But it's definitely better than it was last time.
Oh, very good. Very good. All right. So what's this strange place you're going to tell us about?
Oh, this is probably, all in all, my absolute favorite museum in Paris.
Huh.
And I'm thinking about, of course, not only what is inside it as a collection, but also the environment and the atmosphere of the place itself.
Okay.
So let's maybe explain a little bit about what this is. As you mentioned, its official name is the Georges Pompidou Centre. Mm-hmm. Georges Pompidou was president of France. He was first. Yes,
well,
we're really having one of those mornings. Okay.
That includes Paris, I guess. Yeah.
Includes Paris. And in fact, he was an extremely serious and important collector of 20th century art. Mm. And all presidents like to leave a monument that explains a little bit of their heritage and what they did for the country. And
it's the same tradition that they have in America, where the president gets to have a presidential library
and things like that. And except that in France, it turns out that it's very often an architectural monument. So Mitterrand created the library, which is now called the Frédéric Mitterrand National Library in the...
c'est pas Frédéric, c'est François.
François. Frédéric was his nephew. Okay, we really have a good morning. It's because it's just too early. I don't know. And Pompidou... was responsible for the building of this structure, which is really fascinating because it is not only a museum. It's first of all, let's talk about where it is. It's in a part of Paris. It is part of the very old center of Paris that actually is in the fourth and a teeny little bit of the third arrondissement. It's very close to the river. If you go 2 blocks, you're in the Marais. You're in the more in the fourth, just to the east. You're already in the Marais. If you go 2-3 big blocks to the west, you are actually in the third, and then it becomes the second. It's in this very, very strange little spot that's a combination, but it's very, very old. And what you have surrounding it are lots of beautiful old medieval buildings still. Right.
That's a bit surprising because it's surrounded by old things. So did they just tear down something to put this in?
Yeah. What happened was, and this is I hadn't seen Paris actually before that, but what had happened was that this was a very, very, very old and relatively rundown neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Apparently, it was quite poor, but part of it was historically important because it was connected to this place called Les Halles. Mm-hmm. Oh, we have a visitor here today.
Yeah,
with us.
we have a new kitten at my house, and this new kitten is very talkative. Say hello.
Say hello.
Say hello.
There
she goes. There she goes.
She wants to hear the story about the fish vendors, I think. That's what she wants. Yeah. Okay. But what happened was it was this very, very old, a very important historical area called Les Halles, which was, in fact, starting in the early Middle Ages, the center of food markets and distribution. And this is where all producers of food of any kind, whether it was fruits, vegetables, meat, cheese,
Right.
whatever, this is where they came. And it was largely a distribution center because starting in the Middle Ages, it was where the markets were. But then afterwards, especially in the 19th century, when they built these beautiful glass and metallic structures,
Right.
it was what we would call today the important wholesale section,
Right.
which is where all other people would come to buy their fresh foods to have in their markets or in their houses. It was enormous. It was absolutely enormous.
Well, France has these halles everywhere. Really,
Everywhere.
most even small villages used to have
A covered market.
Right, you would have a covered market, and you would have a church, a Catholic church usually, and the city hall. That's like the trinity
Exactly.
of French
Right.
life.
And this was really starting in the 1100s.
This was big, obviously.
This was big, and it
because
was
it's
extremely
Paris.
important. And in fact, that's why I wanted to mention Émile Zola, the very great naturalist French writer of the 19th century, who was very, very concerned with social issues and the plight of poor people and things like that. He wrote a book called The Stomach of Paris. The title in French is Le Ventre de Paris. And it's about the poor people who work at the markets, who produce things, who go to the market, and the living conditions of all these people. And he wrote that book in 1873. And this area has a lot of nostalgia for Parisians. Even those who are far too young to have ever known when it existed. The name of the area came to be called Les Halles, which
Les
means
Halles.
basically halls, but it's, of course, in French, you don't pronounce the H, so it
Yeah.
makes it hard to say because it's Les Halles.
Yeah.
And the other name for this area was Beaubourg.
Okay.
And
What does that come from?
I don't know.
Okay.
I actually don't know because there's no church Beaubourg. Probably, most likely,
it's a last name.
a nobleman,
yeah.
right? There was probably a Duke
Well,
of Beaubourg.
Beaubourg means beautiful.
Beautiful area.
Yeah.
But I really don't know why it came to be called the Beaubourg area because there's no street Beaubourg. It's Rue Sebastopol, which is the main street that runs north-south that divides basically on the left side, which is the west side, you have the area of, to this day, Les Halles. On the east side, you have the Pompidou Center. So what you have then is this area that for a very long time was very, very famous for being the center of all kinds of activity, working class activity, people bringing foodstuffs into Paris, all of that. And then it became a very rundown and grubby area in the 20th century. And I really have seen only a few pictures of it, but it's interesting because I just want to mention at the end there are a couple of really beautiful streets and churches to visit if you walk around the area. But apparently, starting after World War II, when there was a lot of renovation and building in Paris, Pompidou, if I remember correctly, was president in the early 1970s. And so what happened was that under his presidency, they decided, probably at first for health reasons and not for aesthetic reasons, but because it was really apparently very unsanitary, they moved the wholesale food market out to Rungis, which is near the Orly airport.
Yeah.
They moved it completely out of the city center. And then they decided to raise a large chunk of this old area, which had apparently really nasty medieval houses with no indoor plumbing still. I mean, this is the second half of the 20th century, you know. It was apparently really that funky. And and what happened was he invited them to do two things, and obviously got federal or national money for it, to create a new center that would become what is known as the Les Halles complex, which is now, in fact, destroyed and being redone again, which is so ironic because it's 40 years later, which became a shopping center with movie theaters and also 3 RER trains and 4 metro lines all join underneath.
Right, that's that monstrosity of a train station.
Right, and what they had done was there had been this gorgeous Baltard building. Baltard was the architect who created all the gorgeous glass and metal structures like the Grand Palais and things like that in Paris.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about him another time because he's really a wonderful architect. And that was built at the end of the 19th century. And so what they did was they raised all of it. They created all of this underground shopping area. And at the same time, across the Saint-Denis and across Boulevard Sébastopol, they raised another area and they started the building of this huge cultural center, which is what Pompidou wanted, which is why it's called the Centre Georges Pompidou. And it is, in fact, technically, everyone considers it the museum. When you go there, everyone says, oh, we're going to the museum.
Yeah.
But in the building, and we'll talk about the building because, as you say, there's a lot of controversy about what its structure and whether people like it or not.
Yeah.
In fact, it's a huge building that is considered to be an enormous cultural center because 2 floors of it are art. 2 floors of it are actually the Museum of 20th Century and Contemporary Art, Architecture, and Design. 1 entire floor is the largest open public library in Paris, which apparently, I was doing some reading about it, I hadn't known before the 1970s, actually did not exist. And there's also a documentation and archival floor. So the structure is very big, but technically speaking, only 2 of the floors are actually museum.
Right. So there's much more to it.
There's much more to it. And in fact, it explains why it's one of my favorite places to go because I love the atmosphere of it. So I'll talk about that in a minute.
Right.
But so what happened was basically in the 1970s, this enormous section of Paris got raised and rebuilt.
Right.
And they left a kind of green park on the side close to Les Halles. It's very touristy. There are lots of restaurants, cafes. There are kind of some funky stores. It's not a high-end area at all. It's also, ironically, there's a street called Rue Saint-Denis.
Right.
Which was and still is the red light district of the center of Paris.
Oh, I see.
Very much in a way like if you go to Amsterdam, there's a red light district that is very visible. I mean, it's not hidden away anywhere at all.
Yeah.
I was just back walking through this area a few months ago with my husband because we were looking for some architectural things that are kind of hidden away in this area, including one of the 2 gateways from the medieval times that are still standing that are the gateways into Paris, which is back in the end of the 3rd arrondissement. And when you walk up and down the Rue Saint-Denis, it's quite remarkable. I mean, it has become in its own odd way a kind of tourist attraction because it's just you have different styles and different kinds of things in terms of the women standing out. Nobody hides it. I mean, I don't even know if technically it's considered to be legal or not. But in fact, it is what it is, you know.
Yeah.
But it's not a dangerous area. It's just that it's very odd that in the midst of, on one side of this big major avenue, you have the Cultural Arts Center. On the other side, you have this huge shopping area with this green park. And then in between, you have this street that has been known since the Middle Ages and still is a street that's basically the red light district of the center of Paris.
Well, so they'll meet your every need.
Almost. There was one woman, I have to say this because it was really quite remarkable. And of course, I didn't dare take a picture of her. She was... this was in the summertime. We were there in the summer. So she was standing with a parasol over her head. And she wasn't super young. She wasn't super old. So she was, I would guess that she was probably between 35 and 40 years old. But it was almost comical because she was dressed in black leather and she had handcuffs and a whip, and it was like she was getting ready for a costume party, and she had all these things with spikes, and I thought, well, I guess that's what's called advertising, you know. It's like if you want to go to her, you know what you're in store for, you know?
Yes.
It was quite, you know, and she just stood there with her parasol protecting her from the sun with all of this stuff there, you know, and I thought, this is very
and
interesting.
nobody minds? I mean, the police doesn't interfere or anything?
No, I really don't know what the politics are anymore in the city, because obviously if somebody is out like that in late morning, early afternoon, they obviously are not worried about whether they're going to be arrested or anything like that.
Yeah.
So whatever the legal official policy is, there's a certain tolerance. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I guess as long as they are not doing anything that requires, I don't know, I guess if there's no trade in drugs that's visible, or there's anything that seems to be a public disturbance, they just let them be.
Having somebody with chains and whips and stuff, that's not a public disturbance.
No,
obviously.
I mean, she was, it was kind of like, what costume party are you going to? You know, and I thought, and then I thought, it's not a costume party. Okay, there you are. You know. But anyway, so the whole, the digression is because I actually love walking around this, not that street specifically, but this is a part of the old historical part of Paris that is not chic and bobo trendy like Marais. It's not even the Latin Quarter, which is gorgeous but very staid now. It's very much alive. It's very noisy. It's on some level extremely touristy, but it's really interesting because it really gives you a taste of what Paris might be like 100, 200 years ago,
right?
When it was still a place that was kind of raunchy in a lot of ways, you know. I mean, this is not a new invention, this kind of neighborhood.
Of course.
And so now what has happened is the part that became Les Halles, with the underground shopping center, it is surrounded on several sides by a very commercial area that leads you to Rue de Rivoli. But on the north side, there's this absolutely amazing church called Saint-Eustache, which is a church that is a very strange combination because part of it goes back to the late 1200s, early 1300s. It's this very enormous flamboyant Gothic church that had part of it rebuilt in the Renaissance times. And it's one of those churches that you don't go to because it's not on anybody's A or even B list necessarily, but it's really fascinating to see. And the architecture on the outside is unbelievable. And one of the things that's really great about it is that it is right next to a street that has become very famous and actually very fashionable, and that is Montorgueil.
Okay.
And Montorgueil is a pedestrian street now that is lined with restaurants, cafes, and little shops. It's known as one of the best foodie parts of Paris. And on weekends, it has this wonderful outdoor food market.
Oh, cool.
And I've been there on a Saturday morning and on a Sunday morning, and it's packed with people that come from all kinds of other areas because it's food, and then you can go and sit in a cafe, and the church, which is this huge high church, backs up onto this street, which is filled with what are essentially houses from the probably 15, 16, and 1700s. And so it gives you a feeling of what Paris was a long time ago. So it's kind of neat. So what happened with Les Halles is that it got to be, unfortunately, an area that was too frequented by drug dealers and homeless people because it was created as an underground shopping area, and all of these suburban train lines brought in a lot of people. And so what has happened is that they've actually destroyed it. And they're rebuilding it. And I have no idea what the new Halles is going to look like, but it's up above ground.
So do they close it?
Completely closed.
It's closed and
completely closed. Now I am not sure about what happened to, I guess the subway lines are still there.
Of course.
But the shopping center itself was completely closed down, so it doesn't exist anymore. But there's still a very beautiful park, and you can walk around these streets, which are a bunch of pedestrian streets, and go to this church, Saint-Eustache, and walk up Montorgueil, which takes you into the second arrondissement.
Yeah, a couple of times, not knowing what we were in for, we decided to change metro lines at Les Halles.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's complicated.
Yeah. It's complicated. It's huge.
Châtelet is also like that.
Well, Châtelet-Les they're right next to each other, right?
Somebody told me that I don't know which two lines underground are so far apart, but that you do actually a couple of kilometers.
Yeah.
Underground.
It's massive.
It's massive.
And so I would say, if you can change trains somewhere else, do it.
Right, exactly.
Because that's just a mess
of
a
mess.
metro station.
But
And they might make it better now. I don't know.
Well, I'm hoping that they do. But of course, one of the reasons for that is that it's also a station that they made specifically to connect up to some of the suburban lines. So you have a lot of people who live in the outer areas of Paris who have to come in for work, and then they switch over from the suburban line to a metro line.
Yeah.
And that's apparently why they had to make it that way. But it got really funky. So it was only a couple of years ago they closed it down, and now it's just this huge construction area. But you can still walk around on all the side streets that are largely pedestrian streets and see all of this area. And then what it happens is if you go a little bit east and you cross the big Boulevard of Sebastopol, which is a big street that runs north-south, runs down to Châtelet and then up. You are on another area. You're in another area that has a lot of pedestrian streets, and you are one block from the famous Centre Pompidou Center.
Okay.
And it's one of these places where I feel like a homing pigeon because every time I go to Paris, I go back to this area. And it's interesting because sometimes I'm not necessarily interested in seeing the particular exhibit or whatever they have inside. I just love the neighborhood. I absolutely love it. And
that's really funny because I have the opposite reaction to it. But of course, I've only been maybe twice. I think the Centre Pompidou by itself is really one of the least attractive things I've ever seen, in my opinion.
Right.
Because it's this big building with like...
It's
all
got
the utilities are on the outside.
It's what's called, and it's really it was done intentionally. You know, it won all kinds of awards. I don't know if you know that.
Really?
Well, first of all, there are two things. One is, again, like the area around Les Halles, what they did was they raised an enormous area that was really contiguous with Le Marais. That was apparently very picturesque, and a lot of people protested, not because of the style of what they were about to build, but because they actually tore down a lot of these very beautiful old medieval houses that had half timbering and some things you don't see anymore in Paris at all.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I've never seen anything but a few old black and white pictures, even though this was already in the 1970s that they did this. But they raised this huge area to start building this. And then they did an open competition with international architects, and it was a panel of people that actually decided. There was a jury, and so the two architects that were involved in building this were Renzo Piano, who is an Italian, and now I just suddenly drew a blank on the other one because it wasn't Jean Nouvel. There are two architects that are really well known.
Well, while you look it up,
I'll look it up. But what one of the things that they did, which was totally original, and I don't know if they've ever done another building like it, and I don't know, it would be interesting to know what gave them the idea to do it. But what they did was literally do a building that has an exoskeleton.
Right. Everything's outside.
Everything's outside. And what they did was they created a building where all of the piping, which is really what it is, all of the piping that is... and one of the reasons it's very interesting, you can see it from far away. If you go up to Sacré-Cœur, you can see it. You can see it from the Eiffel Tower. You can see it from Montparnasse Tower. You can see it from the Panthéon because they color-coded it. So it's a structure that has huge, huge pipes, red, yellow, blue, and green, that run all the way around the outside of the building, front and back. And each one is another system. One is the electricity system, one is the water system, one is the heating system. I mean, there's a fourth one, and I don't remember what it is.
Yeah.
Now, I have no idea what gave them the idea to do that. Of course, it was a lot of people hated it, just like they hated the Eiffel Tower. You have to remember.
No, but I mean, the Eiffel Tower is beautiful.
Yeah, but you
like,
have to remember that at the time they showed the plans for the Eiffel Tower, 300 of the most influential people in Paris signed a petition saying it was the ugliest thing that they had seen and it was going to destroy the aesthetics of the city of Paris.
Yeah.
Now,
I think they were wrong on that, but the Pompidou Center really gives you this impression of, it's like having scaffolding over. You're like, oh, I hope they remove the scaffolding so we can see the pretty stuff underneath. But you never get to.
But there is no pretty stuff underneath.
There is no pretty stuff.
No, but what they did do, and of course I have this tolerance for things like that, just because I found it fun. I mean, to me, I think one of the reasons why I say I love it, I love the building. I couldn't.
Even the escalators are outside.
The escalators are inside.
Are they?
Yeah, they're inside. What they're inside, this is the whole thing about it, and this is what they've done. The escalators that take you up to the 6th floor and the rooftop, which has an observatory so you can look out all over, are closed in by glass.
Okay, but
they are they're inside these tubings, so they're on the outside, but they're not outside in the sense that they're protected by they're
but
closed into
but you
glass.
can see the escalators.
That's the whole point.
From the street.
Right.
You can see these tubes with escalators and people going up and down.
Right.
It's really bizarre. I mean, it's like...
But it's like, think about it. The elevator on the Eiffel Tower, if we could follow on the outside, you'd see it too. And like in all of these hotels that they now have the elevators on the outside in the courtyard so you can see them going up and down.
See, when it's elevators like that, they're usually lit in a way that's pretty and stuff. But this I never saw it lit up pretty or anything. It's like tubes with...
It's tubes.
People moving in them. It's a little bit...
it's strange.
Yeah, it's strange. It's unusual.
It's strange. I certainly will admit it's strange.
Yeah.
However, one of the things I guess for me, I couldn't care less. I mean, that doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
What I love about it...
You see beyond that.
I see beyond that.
Yeah.
See, and the two things that I've always loved about the area and the museum itself, well, first of all, it's the largest museum of 20th century art in Western Europe. It is the most important collection of art from the 20th century in practically the world, except for the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's an extraordinary museum for that alone. And it's a museum like the Museum of Modern Art in New York that has a department of architecture. It has a department of design. It has a department of photography. What does that mean? That means that it's not just a museum that deals with painting. You can go in and see incredibly interesting exhibits about 20th century architecture with really interesting things. You have a section that's just devoted to photography, all the photography that's basically the art of the 20th century and on, and design, furniture design. All of those things are included because it's a massive space. It has, I don't know how many square meters, but it's much, much, much bigger than the Museum of Modern Art in New York, for example. And that is just on 2 of the floors in the entire building.
Yeah, it's a big building. Yeah.
It's a big building.
Yeah.
And the floor underneath it is this absolutely magnificent, fabulous public library of anything and everything connected to any of the arts, design, architecture, cinema, photography, and it's used by everybody in the city. And you don't have to be a student to go there. It's considered
public library.
It's a public library. It's the reference in terms of any kind of work that you might want to go and research or look at or anything like that. And down below on the ground floor, you have these alternate spaces. So you have a very good bookshop. You have a design shop. You have a cafe. You have all these other things. And then down below is where the cinema space is, where they do a cinematheque.
Oh, okay.
And they show films all the time. So what it
but
means...
these are like art films.
Well...
It's not like showing the latest flick from
exactly.
Hollywood.
Right.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But it would be. But they have series. That's basically that's what a cinematheque is. A cinematheque is a place that basically runs series of films on a theme or a particular movie maker or something like that. But again, all of this is open, obviously, to anybody. And what that has done is that it has made it extremely lively. And my first reaction in going there, after having spent my first times in Paris going to the Louvre and going to all these other museums, is that it is the unstuffiest place in Paris. And I love it for that reason.
That's good.
I really love it for that reason. Yeah. When you go there, you feel like you are in the heart of a kind of vibrant energy that has to do with contemporary and modern things. And they've tried to do that. Now what's happened is that the Louvre has unstuffied itself a certain amount, which is fine, which I think is really good. I am someone who loves museums, but I think museums should be unstuffy. And I love the Pompidou Center for exactly that reason. And
sorry,
go ahead.
I have a question. Do you often take visitors to the
No,
Centre Pompidou?
No, I don't.
It's not on your regular route.
It's not on my regular route, and I regret that it's not. And in fact, I'm hoping that in next year that it will be there will be a new route, if you want to call it that, a new itinerary that will definitely include a full day in this area. That is the visit to the museum and going to see around Saint Eustache, going to see all of these old streets around it, because I think it's a fabulously vibrant thing to do.
But it's not on your usual route because most people don't ask for it, I guess.
Exactly. And because most people, when they come to Paris, they don't know. This is basically what you have is a kind of circuitous problem of people only want to go to see what they know about.
Yeah.
So how do you convince them to go to see something that they don't necessarily know about already?
You put on a podcast and tell them about it.
You put them on a podcast and tell them about it. And so, this is the other thing. And this is again, me with my love of anything that looks like old Paris. When they designed this museum, and really, I have no idea how they came up with this strange idea of putting all of these incredibly colorful tubings on the outside, because it really does almost, I hate to say this, but it looks like intestines, you know? I mean, it's just huge tubings.
Yeah, the plumbing's on the outside.
The plumbing's on the outside.
So is the structure.
The total structure.
The metal beams.
It's an exo. I mean, the rest of it's all glass, okay? Which is great because it lets in a lot of natural light as well.
Yeah.
But what they did was they designed it with an esplanade that is on a slant. To go to the entrance of the museum, there's this huge open space that is cobblestoned, and around it are still some very gorgeous old buildings from the 15 and 1600s. And what happened was, without it being explicitly planned for, from the beginning, and it opened in 77, okay? The structure was actually finished the first time in 1977. What happened was, and I don't know why, people immediately started using the esplanade as an open circus area. So you have jugglers, you have people who perform, you have people who are vendors of little things that they make, you have people who play music and busk for money, and it became
They what for money?
To busk.
I don't know that word.
Oh, you don't know?
No. B-U-S-K?
B-U-S-Q-U-E. I think maybe it's B-U-S-K. To busk.
Right. I'll have to look it up.
To be a busker, yeah.
I learned a new word.
Yeah.
Yay.
And you know, and so it is now. Even when you read a description of it, they talk about it. And now the downside of that is that for a number of years, and it's changed, it's been cleaned up because they've done some more taken care of in terms of security, is that it became so popular that you would have hundreds and hundreds of people who would be standing around each of these people who's playing music, who's doing mime, who's doing this, who's doing that. And the pickpockets loved it.
Of course.
So this was, but my first time of going and seeing all of this, I thought to myself, it's like in the Middle Ages. In the Middle Ages, this is what life was like. You had zillions of people on the streets all the time, people who were selling things, people who were performing, people who were out, because theater was out in the streets.
Yeah.
And so it spontaneously became like this, and now it's famous for this, you see. So now, besides the fact that sometimes you have to stand online because there's a famous show that, like 2 years ago, there was a huge retrospective of the sculptor Giacometti, who happens to be very, very famous. And
so they take traveling exhibits.
Huge. No, they create.
Oh, they create.
Oh, they create. They create. They do. Last year it was Roy Lichtenstein, who's of course a very famous pop artist, but they make huge retrospective blockbuster shows, and that are obviously all about 20th century or now 21st century art, and. So sometimes you have lines or you have to buy a ticket if you want to do that, because you have in the museum part, which is basically the 4th floor, the 5th floor, and sometimes a part of the 6th floor, you have a part that's permanent collection, and then you have a part that's special exhibits.
Okay.
So it's not a cheap museum. It's not at all. It's not public in the sense that it's free. There are no free museums in Paris, you know.
Well, Carnivale, you told us that last time.
Yes, the history of Paris Museum is the only one. Interestingly enough, however,
so how much is it to get into the
€12.
Pompidou? Well, that's not expensive.
And if I'm not mistaken, because of course now I don't remember anymore because with my guide card I don't have to do that. But you have one price. I think it's €10 if you just do the permanent exhibit, and then maybe it's 14 or 15 euros if you do that plus if there's a special exhibit.
Okay.
So you get a joint ticket, and then if you go as a family, there's a discount for families. There are, students under 26 have a discount. Obviously, I mean, people know that they have to pay. This is not London where everything is free. But
that's true. The museums are free.
Free in London. Yeah. But part of that is because the money does indeed go to the upkeep of the museum. And I mean, it's not like it's, in a sense, money that's abusively gathered together or something.
It's kind of funny, isn't it? Because in London, the museums are free. In
Smithsonian, too.
Yeah. In Italy, you often have to pay to go into churches, which you don't have to do in France.
That's true.
So each country does it a little bit differently.
Every country does it a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Now, I think, and this is just an aside, but you're right. I remember the last time I was in Venice, I was surprised that there were several churches where you had to pay. But I think that my guess is that that's number one because of the mess of the cultural ministry in Italy, which is something on another level we might talk about sometime in terms of comparing how countries take care of their cultural heritage, but also that a lot of the churches in Italy, unlike in France, have works by the great masters.
Yeah.
And I think it's, you have Bellinis and Titians and Tintorettos and all these things in all of these churches in Italy. And I guess it's part of that money goes to having just guards there to make sure that these works are not destroyed. But to get back to the Pompidou, so it's really, I love the atmosphere there. I love the fact that it's this really fun kind of place.
Does it ever get gloomy, like if it's rainy and
it gets
dark?
I have been there a couple of times when it gets really, well, Paris can be gloomy and rainy. I mean, Paris itself.
Some days, yes.
But I've gone up the escalator many times when even that I find the gloominess disappears because, as you mentioned, since these escalators are on the outside protected by glass and you go up 4 or 5 levels of escalator, you get up to the point where you're above the rooftops of old Paris and you can see in the distance on one side Sacré-Cœur and on the other side the Eiffel Tower.
So if you just want to go to the public library, I assume you don't need a ticket for that.
No, you don't.
Okay.
No, you don't.
So if you just want to go see the public library, you can do that.
Well, yes, but there's a separate entrance for that because what happened was at first, apparently, when they first opened up, everything was open to the public, and then they were just taking admissions and paying for tickets when you get to a certain floor.
Oh, I see.
And it turned out to be too much of a traffic problem. So now the deal is you can go down into the main entrance level. You don't have to pay, obviously, to go in there. And there's one way of getting access to the public library floor. And then if you want to go into the floors that have the collections, you have to have a ticket that you buy down below.
Yeah.
So you have, you can go up 1 or 2 floors without having to pay. Like you can go to the floor that has the shop with the design. You can go to the library. But when you want to go further than that, you have to show a ticket that you've already bought on the ground level.
You probably need a ticket to get to the observatory on top.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Okay. And that's the way they've managed to sort of fix it up a little bit. And they were having a huge circulation problem. And I think it just got to the point where they couldn't control who was going in and paying and who was not. So they changed it. Yeah. I don't remember it from before it was the way it is now. So I really can't say. And the other thing, of course, around it is that you have a whole neighborhood that has pedestrian streets, and you have lots of little restaurants that are not very expensive, and ethnic restaurants. This is ironically an area, besides the big cafes, there's one glorious kind of art nouveau cafe that's right across from the Esplanade, and it's very beautiful, and you have this huge terrace outside, but then it's very beautiful inside as well. And once I I know the inside only because one day it was raining and I went inside as opposed to sitting on the terrace looking out at everything because I love to just watch the world go by.
Yeah.
And it's a great place to do that. It's a great place to sit in one of these cafes and just watch the world go by.
Yeah.
You have you have everything from the most eccentric people in the world to street artists and musicians. And if you go around the corner to the side of it, you have this incredible fountain that has the work of Niki Saint-Phal, the famous French sculptress artist, who's now, in fact, right at this moment, has a huge retrospective at the Grand Palais in Paris. She and her husband, a man named Jean Tinguely, were both sculptors, and they both did what is called kinetic sculpture. And that means that everything moves.
Yeah.
Her work is, you've seen it. You don't know her name.
Yeah.
It's colorful. It's usually round, very beautifully round women and animals and objects. It's filled with color. It always moves, and it's a fountain, and it's absolutely wonderful.
Cool.
And it's right there around the corner, and right there because they obviously it was an area that had a little square before. So you have this huge open fountain with this kinetic sculpture, a bunch of cafes, restaurants, a theater, and then another church called Saint-Merri, Merri, which takes you practically to the Seine River, going that way. And it's a church that has a part of it that goes back to the 1100s. And it's a church that very few people know about. But one of the things about this neighborhood is that it's filled with these little treasures.
Yeah.
So going to Pompidou, you have all kinds of things possible. You have the idea of going in and seeing some very interesting contemporary art. And because this museum is extremely important, it has what are now considered to be classics of 20th century art. So you have all of the really well-known people, and you also have very interesting things. I've seen a couple of really interesting architectural shows there, which I find very interesting because they're, you have scale models and you have theories about architecture and urbanism in the future. Mm-hmm. So you have, there's in a sense almost something for everybody if what you're looking for is not just medieval. And sometimes I can, even me, get tired of medieval, except that I love it when I'm walking around the streets. Yeah. And here what you have is the charm of old Paris that's been fixed up, even if it's touristy. I just think there's nothing wrong with touristy neighborhoods. Oh, yeah. It's touristy. Okay. It's touristy. It's very touristy. But
it's just maybe not American tourists?
Sure, you have everything.
Everything, okay.
You have everything. I mean, but I love neighborhoods like this. You have this one street that leads up to the Esplanade, and I don't remember the name of it, but it's one of the main streets that leads up that has restaurants. You have a Mongolian restaurant. You have weird ethnic restaurants. That's fun to find all these things. You have little shops with clothing that you would never say, oh, gee, look, there's these odd things here. There's like a couple of used clothing stores. There's a couple of good bookstores. This is what I love about cities in general. Mm-hmm. And here you have what I consider to be kind of the best combination of old and new. Mm-hmm. And you're right. The building is ugly.
Oh, okay.
It's ugly.
Okay, you agree with me.
Yeah. I mean, but like it's like, so it's ugly.
Yeah.
Now, it happens that in the 1990s, so it was about 20-something years old. I don't know exactly which year. They started having some structural problems.
Oh.
And they did, in fact, close it down for a year or two, and it was reopened again. And to be honest, I really don't know what the problems were. I don't know if it was because they were having problems since all of these things that are basically functional were on the outside, so they had to fix them up, whether they were cracks. I have no idea. Yeah. I really don't. But they apparently sealed off the glass exterior more because I think there were leaks in the glass. So, and they did some work on renovating there's a very nice fancy restaurant up on the top floor that has this huge observatory deck and stuff like that. And they added a few things, and it seems to me what they did was they put in more natural light. But I'm not sure exactly how they did that because I don't think you can really change the major structure.
So who would you say this museum is for, especially? What type of person shouldn't miss this museum?
I would say that this is a museum you can take a family to.
Okay.
I mean, unless you've got little kiddies, you're not going to drag 5 and 6 year olds, although some people do, to a museum because they just whine their way through it usually. It's like they're bored. But I think if you have children from the ages of 10, 11 on, and you want to have, I think that everybody can enjoy the structure. I think kids get a kick out of seeing this thing that's got red, blue, yellow, and green. And it's kind of like, they don't think, oh my goodness, it's ugly. It's like, oh, how weird, fun kind of thing. The escalator is a trip because you go up and you really get a view of Paris that is unbelievable. The collection is the kind of collection, unless you're someone who has a hatred of all art that was done after the beginning of the 20th century. And some people are like that.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of stuff for everybody. And the reason I think it's a good place to even take a family is because I think pop art is something that kids relate to. Parents will say, "Oh, that's not art," but kids really like it because it's colorful. It's images that they know from everyday life, from advertising, and it's not religious scenes that are dark and depressing. I mean, so I really think that it's a great place. And then of course there's a section that has design. So you have objects that you can look at. There's a great bookstore there, and so I would not hesitate to.
And the kids might get a kick out of the Esplanade with all
exactly
the jugglers or whatever going
right.
on.
There's always somebody, a mime, someone playing music. There's always some people selling still macrame things. You think they had a time warp and they were back to 40 years ago or something. I mean and then the sculpture in this fountain, the Niki Saint-Phal sculpture, is wonderful.
Niki what?
Saint-Phal, P-H-A-L-L-E.
Okay.
She I don't remember when she died. She didn't die that long ago, actually. Niki, Niki.
Yeah.
Saint.
K-I.
And then her last name, her last name was Saint-Phal. She was P-H-A-L-L-E.
Niki Saint-Phal.
Niki Saint-Phal, yeah.
Huh.
She was really great.
Where was she from?
Here.
Oh, she's
from Provence, I think, in fact.
Okay.
Yeah. And she, right now, I'm saying there's this huge retrospective of all her work, and all of her work is with these very colorful pieces, and a lot of it is kinetic sculpture. And so the fountain, I've seen in the summertime families where the kids go, I mean, I don't think you're supposed to, but, they put their feet in the fountain. I mean, it's a huge fountain. It's not, the fountain itself is the thing that turns with several pieces. It's kind of like in a circus. It looks like a circus. But the space, the fountain pool, wading pool is huge. So in the hot summer, kids and dogs tend to go in it and stick their feet in it.
Yeah.
And, and there are ice cream vendors and all of that. And there's even a Starbucks right there. I mean, it's like, I shouldn't say that.
Goodness. You whispered it. It's okay.
I whispered it, So I think, take kids to the Louvre. I don't know. I mean, there may be a few areas of the Louvre where you can take kids to. I've seen the educational outreach programs that they do because they actually organize something and they have them sit down and copy it. I'm not so sure it really works.
The thing is, that's all in French.
It's all in French.
I took my daughter when her French was still minimal. And, I mean, she was fine because she had been going to French school for a few weeks. And, she wasn't freaked out. But still, it's all in French.
It's all in French.
They don't have kids' programs in English.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
No. But I really think that the Pompidou Center is a place that you can definitely take kids. And the area is fun to walk around.
And people who love modern art probably would.
And modern art. And definitely. There is...
And maybe old cinema, like
old
art cinema.
Well, there are 2 or 3 cinematheques in Paris. Paris is the city with the most movie theaters in the world.
Oh, really?
Cinema started there.
Yeah.
Probably Bombay or Mumbai, as they now call it, probably is second. But Paris is known for being the place to go if you want to see a film. And so besides the cinemas that show current films, you have the idea of a cinematheque, which is basically an archival museum of cinema.
Right.
And they own Like we have one here in Toulouse. It's the second best in France after Paris. That means that they own copies of thousands of films. And so what you have is 1 month it may be films by a specific director. You know? And then the next month it might be cowboy movies or, war movies from World War I or whatever it is the theme is.
Yeah.
Then they will show a whole series, and they usually put out a program that's a monthly program. And Pompidou is part of this system. So they have all of this. I just think that unless you have someone who has a total aversion to anything that's been produced in the way of art in the last 120 years, basically, which is a long time now when you think about it.
It's not so modern anymore.
It's not modern anymore.
Right.
It's considered, this is the distinction, okay? This is an art historical distinction.
Okay.
Contemporary art is art from the last 30 or so years.
Okay.
Modern art, depending on who you talk to, is either the last 100 or 200 years.
I see.
Because it depends on the style of the artwork.
Okay.
Okay? It depends on whether it's work that really looks like it was a new concept, a new innovation, or whether it's simply copying already what existed before.
So somebody who produces sculpture today, you would call that contemporary art.
Unless it's a reproduction of a classical Greek sculpture.
Of course.
In which case, we'd say he was a copyist. And that would be
Which
it.
is kind of fun, too.
Which is fun too. But, for instance, if you go to a museum like the Orsay, which is a museum that deals with art from 1848 to 1914, exactly. I don't know what they do with the work in 1915, but whatever. The museum is interesting because a lot of the work is academic work, which means it's basically interesting, beautifully made, but it copies old style.
Yeah.
And then one of the reasons that the people that were the Impressionists and the people that followed them became important is because they broke the old rules. And they started doing things which now to us, because we're so used to seeing them for so long, it's like we're used to it. We assume this is the way it was, you see. At the time that they did it, it was really new. So if you go to a museum like the Pompidou, a lot of it is work we've already seen. You've seen a lot of pop art. People have seen work by Picasso. People have seen work by people like that. Some people still don't get it. Some people find it still really weird. But think about it. That's already 100 years old.
I know. It's pretty old.
It's pretty old, So it's like, that's not what we're doing anymore, Now we do grass patches and little sounds that go tick, 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 and somebody will say,
is that what we do now?
Things like that, yeah.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
But anyway, I find that, quite honestly, I mean, there are not too many things I don't like about Paris. I mean, obviously, you can get that idea already. But when I want to just have a quick uplift, I like going to this area.
So it's energetic.
Yeah, it's energetic. It gives me a hint of like old, vibrant Paris, when people were outside all the time and not just running to the metro and stuff like that. And there's a certain colorfulness about it, which I think is interesting because it's true that the building does not belong in a sense.
Right.
It doesn't.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's weird, but it's colorful,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess I have an enormous tolerance for that as opposed to maybe some other kinds of things, I don't know why, but this one, I look at it and I go, yeah, it is, I guess, pretty ugly. So what, I love it there.
Yeah, you still like the area. And
I
all
still
that.
like the
and
area.
And it's good to have variety, for people who've been to Paris a few times and that have seen a lot of other things. It's great.
It's great.
And maybe they should dedicate a few hours so they can enjoy the area as
Yes.
well as the museum.
Yes.
Because if you just go to the museum, look at this ugly thing, and then go see some art that maybe won't talk to you,
right.
That would be a pretty disappointing time. But if you spend some time in the area and you happen to like kind of lively neighborhoods and
right.
stuff, that would be
that would
be good.
And it really is an area where you have you have your big cafes, and you can have some cafes that are a little bit more expensive because they're across from the museum, but it's filled with wonderful little restaurants that aren't that very expensive. And it's a nice, fun area to walk around.
Excellent. Okay.
Oh, and yeah, and one
yeah,
last
yeah.
thing.
Okay.
I don't have any names off the top of my head, but it is also because it's so close to the Marais and because of where it is, there are a bunch of little hotels right nearby.
Ah.
So it's if you want to be on that side of the river, which of course is the right bank, and very close to the Marais. It's also an area that is filled with small, interesting little hotels.
That's good.
And very close by, behind it, which means basically on the north end, going back just a few blocks, you have a small museum called the Museum of Arts et Métiers,
Yes.
which is very interesting because it sometimes has... I once saw a really beautiful show on the history of maps. Which was very nice. And again, it's one of these small museums that are lovely to discover when you've done your biggies, you know.
Yes, yes.
And you want something that's more human scale. So I think the neighborhood and the Pompidou Center and even going as far as Les Halles, I think all of this has a lot to offer as a way of discovering parts of Paris.
And it would be a good area to stay in, you think?
Yeah, I think so. It's just a little noisy. I mean, I think you have to be on a side street. Some of this, and obviously I know more of the little hotels in the Marais, which is just a few blocks further. But I passed a bunch of the hotels around there, and I know people who like staying in that area as well.
Yeah. It would be noisy and bustling. I mean,
It's noisy and
if you
bustling.
want quiet, secluded, don't go there.
No, don't go there. No.
You'll
Go
be
to a
sorely
hotel
disappointed.
across from the Panthéon, which is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous, and quiet.
Nobody's there.
Nobody's there.
It's only little old ladies walking their poodles.
Little rich old ladies.
Yes. That goes without saying. Okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you very much.
You are welcome.
I would like to remind everybody that we would love it if you would go visit our Amazon link so we can make a couple of bucks to keep the show going.
And it's getting to be time to think about Christmas presents.
Christmas presents, and there's going to be Thanksgiving coming up, and, good stuff. So it's joinusinfrance.com/Amazon. And that will take you right to some flags. Click on your country flag, and it'll take you to the Amazon store. And it's automatic. We get a small commission. So that would be great.
Isn't that good?
And there's also the two banner ads on the front page. And if you click through from our front page, so just from joinusinfrance.com, and you go to wines.com that way, we get a small commission. Same with the hotels right below. So thank you very much, listeners. We'll talk to you next week.
Have a good week.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Au revoir.
Au revoir.